Hello everybody, you're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host Dane Cobain. This is the weekly radio show where we chat about the local arts news. We have a different guest on each week. We head over to the Rhylight Zone for a short story and or some poetry. We play local unsigned and or independent music, and we catch up with Twangling Jack Ford over in the Oak Shed. As always, you can find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. You can email me here at the studio on dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. And we're repeated on Monday nights on Wickham Sound or on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. So this week we're going to be chatting to author Sara Yates, but before we do that, we're going to head over to the Rhylight Zone. This is a short story called Kangaroo Woman that I wrote over Christmas. My friend Jeremy Fee is putting an anthology together called Half Human Heroes, and he wanted stories that fitted that theme. So I came up with this idea, wrote it, and then ended up submitting something else that got accepted anyway. But this is Kangaroo Woman by myself, Dane Cobain. Kangaroo Woman. Not all superheroes wear capes, and not all of them live in the States. Skippy Butler, or Betty according to her birth certificate, wasn't like other superheroes. She had a vagina for a start. She also had powerful legs, big feet and a small head, as well as a pouch called a marsupium. It came in handy for carrying her keys and her mobile phone. She'd had her powers for as long as she could remember. Her parents had told her that when she was 3 years old, she'd wandered off when they were camping in the outback. It had been the middle of the night and they'd been miles from help, and so her parents had set out to look for her with powerful handheld torches and a growing sense of unease and despair. They'd found her at a watering hole, gnawing at the grass with the other joeys. They never learned what transpired in those missing hours, but in the months and years that followed, Skippy had started to change. The family dentist had pronounced himself stumped by her molars and incisors, which were poorly suited for human food but which seemed perfectly developed for grazing. The two sides of her lower jaw grew apart, giving her a wide bite and a mouth that looked too large for her little face. Puberty had been a nightmare. Her parents had tried to console her. "Kangaroos are incredible creatures," her mother had said, "and you're joining a long line of Aussie tradition." "You could join the Air Force," her father had added. "There are roos all over the gear and the uniform." "I'd rather just be a normal person," Skippy had replied. But as she'd grown older, she'd also learned more of injustice, which permeated the world like a ghost pepper in a curry. Skippy had grown closer to nature, and she'd learned to commune with the wildlife in her garden. They lived in a backwater of a town that had been all but forgotten by the big cities, and the Butler house was just beyond what passed for the city limits. Their nearest neighbour was half a mile away, and the house itself had been half swallowed by the snakes in the bushes. She spoke to the animals every day, although she had no way of knowing how much they understood. Either way, they never attacked her, and after a few scares and understandable overreactions, her parents had learned to take a back seat. Skippy was very different to the other kids. At school, she was something of a loner, and she was often the target of abuse from her classmates. She didn't look like them, and she didn't think like them. On the rare few occasions when one of the other kids had tried to start a fight with her, she'd knocked them senseless with a formidable right hook. They were scared of her, and that was how she liked it. It didn't help that she was shy and retiring, just like her fellow roos. She presented no threat to other students, and she didn't attack without provocation, but if she was backed into a corner and threatened with bodily harm, she could hold her own. Her only friend was her little brother, Terry. There was an 8-year age difference between the two of them, but they'd bonded with one another because of their shared love of the nature that surrounded them. And so it was no surprise that when Betty became Kangaroo Woman, Terry became her sidekick, Wallaby Boy. People from Skippy's town didn't go to university. It just wasn't the done thing. Most of them left school at 16 and started work on the family farms, while the girls looked for husbands and prepared to live as housewives. When Skippy left school, she took a different route, making a living of sorts as an animal wrangler for hire. Most of her clients were the kids that she'd gone to school with, or members of their extended families. The fact that they didn't like her wasn't enough to stop them from seeking her out completely. Her uncanny knack for working with animals was common knowledge, as was anything else out of the ordinary in the backwater of a town. She still lived with her parents, who had no idea that their daughter was living a double life. By day, Skippy Butler captured and rehoused dangerous animals. By night, she was Kangaroo Woman, a vigilante superhero with a difference. She'd first learned about poachers when she was a teenager, and she'd been reading everything she could get her hands on that talked about her country's wildlife. She'd been horrified to learn that wild kangaroos were hunted down for their meat and hides. Some people thought that the meat was healthier than other meats because kangaroos didn't have as much fat as, say, a pig. Skippy didn't know about that, though. She was the only vegan she knew, and when people made jokes about her eating grass, they didn't know how close to the truth they were. Her tendency to eat like a roo had a further layer, and one which had left her parents worrying that she was struggling with bulimia. Every now and then, after a particularly tough patch of grass, Skippy would regurgitate it, chew it as cud, and then swallow it again. Luckily for her, she'd never been asked on a date, and so she'd never found herself doing it at a swanky restaurant. When she was Kangaroo Woman, Skippy raced through the wilderness at speeds of up to 25 miles per hour, although she had to slow down when she had Wallaby Boy at her side. She had a radio that she used to listen in on the poachers' communications, and had an uncanny knack for tracking them down. When she found them, she made them wish that she hadn't. Skippy's kangaroo powers meant that she could fight better than any boxer, and her fast reaction times allowed her to dodge the occasional bullets when the poachers were armed. Mostly, she just beat them into bloody pulps and left them there. If she found them for a second time, she showed them no mercy, just as they showed no mercy to the roos that they hunted. On one occasion, she'd chased the poachers through the outback, first on foot and then in the back of their off-roader. They'd come to a ravine and abandoned the car, then made their way across on the back of a ladder, which they tossed away as soon as they'd reached safety. They'd thought they were safe, and they'd stuck around to taunt their pursuer when she caught up with them, but they'd underestimated her. Skippy had turned round and taken a few steps away, which had caused the poachers to start hooting and hollering. But their victory had been short-lived, because she'd turned around and raced up to the edge of the ravine, then launched herself through the air on her powerful legs and landed right in the middle of them. Then she'd reared up and sent them scattering into the night, but she'd tracked down each and every one of them by the time that the dawn came. She'd made sure that none of them would ever poach again. On another occasion, she'd chased the poachers into a river, which they'd attempted to ford on foot. There had been a strong current, but kangaroos are decent swimmers, and Skippy had put in plenty of practice in the sea and at the nearest municipal swimming pool, which was a 1-hour drive away. She followed her prey into the river and pounced on them one by one, holding them beneath the water with her forepaws. She took each of them to the brink of drowning and then dragged them across to the other side, where she left them coughing and heaving. She miscalculated with one of them and the man drowned, but it was no great loss. As well as her powerful legs, Skippy also had a tail, which was difficult for her to hide unless she wore baggy pants and took care when she sat down. Her tail was a secret weapon, helping out with her balance and working like a third leg when she had to pick up speed. When she was with other people, she walked on 2 legs. When she was hunting poachers in the outback, she added her tail into the mix. Her pouch came in useful too. From time to time, she'd rescue injured animals, like when she'd found a bird and returned it to its nest. She also used it to store any ID that the poachers were carrying, so that she could alert the authorities, anonymously of course, and let them know that they might want to send out some cop cars and an ambulance. Skippy Butler knew more about kangaroos than anyone. That was one of the reasons why she got so annoyed with people. Her secret identity wasn't particularly secret, and the local papers occasionally ran stories on Kangaroo Woman, the anti-poaching crusader who worked outside the law. When they did, they invariably asked Skippy for a comment, with mixed results. On one occasion, she chased a journalist off the family property and all of the way back to town, toying with the man by keeping her speed low so that he was always a dozen yards ahead of her. His mistake? He'd trotted out the same old story. "I understand that Sir Joseph Banks was the first to write about the kangaroo," he said. "Correct," Skippy replied. "He was sailing with James Cook on the Endeavour. They spotted a roo at Cooktown while the Endeavour was being repaired after a run-in with the Great Barrier Reef." "I see you've done your research." "And I see you've done yours." "I assume you know the story about how they got their name," the journo said. Cook asked one of the locals what they were called, and they said kangaroo, which meant "I don't know," and because they didn't speak the language, he thought that was what they were called. Skippy stiffened and said, "That's an urban legend, and one that I don't think it's appropriate to repeat. There's enough misinformation about kangaroos as is." The journalist shook his head and said, "I think you've been misinformed." "I think you'd better get off my property," Skippy replied. When the man refused and continued to press her with questions, she started hopping. Before either of them knew it, he'd hit the road and she was chasing after him. When Skippy had first started hunting the hunters, she'd struggled with her empathy, but she'd soon found that she had to be tough if she wanted to stop them from returning. Scaring them away wasn't enough because they'd just come back a few days later. She'd learned to put her empathy behind her and to break a limb or two, and she was helped by the fact that she saw herself as the missing link between the roos and the humans. An injured human was a better result than a dead kangaroo. Her research had helped her there too. Whenever she was tempted to go easy, she thought about the aptly named John Gore, one of Cook's officers who'd shot a kangaroo and transported its skin and skull to England, where it had been taxidermied and put on display to the general public. Whenever she felt a twinge of remorse for going in heavy-handed, she thought of John Gore. Human beings were the main predators for the roos, and she was the main predator of the human beings. Skippy died when she was 25 years old, a good age for a roo, but nothing at all for a human. It wasn't a poacher that got her in the end, although they'd had their moments. Instead, it was a jet black Land Rover that had been driving on a back road without its headlights on. 90% of Australian animal collisions involved kangaroos, and Skippy became just another statistic. In a cruel twist of irony, the Land Rover was being driven by a conservationist who'd been on a way to a call-out. There were poachers on the reservation and someone needed to stop them. But Kangaroo Woman and Wallaby Boy would be no help. Not then and not ever again. The conservationist didn't know whether to call paramedics or an out-of-hours vet. It became a moot choice as Betty Butler died in her arms in the darkness, her marsupial blood mixing with the dust and returning to the soil to nurture the wildlife that she'd come from. That was Kangaroo Woman by myself, Dane Cobain, for this week's entry into the Rhylight Zone. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound, and this is Caitlin McAvoy with Beautiful.
Wide hips, small waist, hip dips, no fake beauty should cause no hate. Too short, too tall, too fat, too thin, don't let them make you fall apart. The media's lies, you need bigger thighs, must fit a smaller size. Let's disconnect, one day they'll accept no love and no respect. Don't change, you're perfect, just know you're worth it. Shouldn't have to feel the shame. At night she's crying from all her fighting to look like all the other girls. Beauty is pain, it's all they'll ever say. Don't waste away, don't let your mind define, you will shine. You're beautiful, more than my curves. Look at my work, perfection causes nerves. Don't make a disguise to please all the guys. You don't need to hide. Don't change, you're perfect, just know you're worth it. Shouldn't have to feel the shame. At night she's crying from all her fighting to look like all the other girls. Beauty is pain, it's all they'll ever say. Don't waste away, don't let your mind define, you will shine. You're beautiful. Beauty is pain, it's all they'll ever say. Don't waste away, don't let your mind define, you will shine. You're beautiful. Beauty is pain, it's all they'll ever say. Don't waste away, don't let your mind define, you will shine. You're beautiful.
It's 2 a.m. and we're still on the phone. The shadows up, but the mood is down. Trying to figure out if you're going on taste which of us has the greenest grass is her chore. Well done, puppy, I win with the solitude. Mine is worse since you a dude. Can't we disagree on how to nurse our scars? Gay friend, gay friend, gay friend, my friend. You dress like a cliche, you frame me like a shrink. What would I do without you? I obvious, the unthinkable, that you think about others, you. There's a brunch break by my sanity. You refuse to judge, you're just there for me. You are so right, why is this so hard to admit? Gay friend, gay friend, gay friend, my friend. You dress like a cliche, you frame me like a shrink. What would I do without you? I can't bear to think. Charges, you have to proceed like a wary cat. Well, your values be cold, your bill be cold. Times you shouldn't have to hide, we shouldn't have to hate. Let it be, let it all hang out. Gay friend, gay friend, my friend. Like a cliche, you frame me like a shrink. What would I do without you? I can't bear to live. Gay friend, my friend. You dress like a cliche, you frame me like a shrink. What would I do without you? I can't bear to
That was Gay Friend by Fabulous Parfait, and before that we had Beautiful by Caitlin McAvoy. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it is time for us to be joined by this week's guest, who is author Sara Yates. What was the last book that you read, and what did you think of it?
Oh, that's a really good question. So the last book I read was about the one and only UK astronaut who and his experience of going up into space and what got him there. It was really eye-opening to me because I think when it was all happening in the media, I didn't massively engage because I sort of assumed he was some complete nerd that I wouldn't find interesting. And reading his book gave me a whole new insight because you actually realise that, he wasn't the best performer at school. But it was tenacity, huge amount of hard work, determination, dedication that really got him to this pinnacle of his career. And it was really quite inspirational. So that was the last book I read.
Awesome, cool. And on the subject of books, obviously I want to chat to you about your writing. So I thought a good place to start would be to ask, who is Freddie Firebreath? And what can you tell us about Freddie Counts to Zen?
So Freddie Firebreath is an angry dragon. He's a dragon who loves adventure and particularly likes treasure. And he goes on an adventure to find some treasure and dives into a castle. But what he thinks is treasure from the sky actually turns out to be the bins that are glinting with all the goo that are on them. And that goo gets stuck on his wings and he gets trapped in the castle. And that makes him incredibly angry. So angry, in fact, that he completely loses his cool. And flames fly everywhere. And fortunately, 2 boys are on hand to help him calm down by teaching him how to breathe.
Awesome. And you mentioned anger, which is very much the theme. And I wondered, why is it so important to teach kids about anger and how to control it?
I think all children have issues with anger. In fact, to be honest, many parents and adults have issues it's a completely normal emotion to get angry. The question is, how do you deal with it? And unless you teach children how to make that difference, how to pause, how to breathe, they ultimately end up making bad choices.
Yeah.
About you, but I find that sometimes when people are angry, it's almost as though the world turns into a mirror, and they get really angry, and then the anger comes back at them, and then they get even more angry, and the anger comes back at them. Whereas if they had the time to practice breathing and just calming down, they'd be able to diffuse that situation and take back control, rather than completely losing control and, you know, getting very angry and getting into what can be quite a difficult position, which ends up with them getting hurt.
Yeah, and I think there are very few sort of like places in life where anger is not even positive, but is even neutral. I mean, maybe like if you're running or something like that, it might give you an extra boost. You might run a bit farther than you normally would. Maybe in something like a boxing match or something. But even then, you still need to know how to control it. And I think, I wanted to ask you, when you look at, say, people who are adults now, do you think that people who are adults now have missed out by not having a book like yours when they were children? Because, as you say, a lot of adults still struggle with anger issues, and I don't think it's something that ever really has historically been taught to people, of how to kind of control it and not let it affect their lives.
I think you're absolutely spot on. You know, if I go back to when I was at school, which is many, many years ago now, it was the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic,
Mm-hmm.
which are important, absolutely, but there's so much more to actually being a successful human being. I think probably one of the most important things from a very young age is building good mental health foundations. And that really means learning to deal with difficult emotions, because we're going to get difficult emotions all through our lives. Anger, anxiety, worry, all these things are going to crop up. And it's one thing to know them and to acknowledge them, but it's something entirely different to know what to do when they strike, so that how you can then regain that control. Because I think often what happens is people lose control, and then this vicious spiral happens. So I think you're absolutely right. We don't really teach people how to do that. And what I'm hoping to do is just really move the needle a little bit and help children build up much better mental health foundations to prepare them better for life.
Yeah. And how did you approach kind of finding a balance between, telling a story that's entertaining and also sharing some of this informative stuff on, how to manage emotions?
I'm very fortunate in the 2 boys in the story actually happen to be my own children, and they have been my guinea pigs. So it really started off with me telling them stories. As a child, my father always told me lots of stories. And sadly, he passed away when I was in my early 20s. And when they came along, I really wanted to almost relive that. So rather than tell stories about Princess Sara Jane, which is what my dad told me, I started telling them stories about Prince Reuben and Prince Harrison. And initially, they were very much just about what we'd done in the day and really helping them put life in context. But I was also at the time chairing a mental health charity, and I began to realize the importance of positive core beliefs. When I grew up, it was very much negative core beliefs. You can't do that. You mustn't do this. Positive core beliefs. And thinking about mental health strategies. And I found myself weaving these into the stories. And one day, my quite grumpy 2-year-old, who has an amazing headbutt and can really do some damage with it, was quite angry. And then suddenly he just went, "I've blown out my anger, mummy." And I sort of stuck back and I thought, wow, I've been telling you this story I've been making up about Freddie, and it's made a difference. And if it can make a difference for you, maybe it can make a difference for someone else. And that's really where Freddie Counts to Zen came from, and where the idea to have a book that wasn't just a bedtime story, but actually a book that could help others.
Yeah, awesome. And you mentioned Princess Sarah Jane. There was also Dobbin as well. What can you tell us about them and some of the adventures they went on?
So I was always desperate to have a horse. I grew up in the northwest of England, in my little house, and had dreams of grandeur. But frankly, I was never going to get a horse. I got a rabbit instead. That was about the extent of my pet ownership. And my father always used to tell me stories about me with my white horse. There was generally a Wicked Witch Laura involved in it who happened to be my nan, which now looking back is quite hilarious. But it would be all the little stories of me going on adventures, picnics, fighting the witch, getting jewels and gems. Very, very traditional stories. But it's nice to be able to reminisce as I tell my own children that, because I can remember the stories my dad told me, and then tell a variant for them, which is much more up to date.
Mm-hmm.
There's certainly no iPads and Pokemon or anything like that in the stories my dad told me. So it's nice to be able to update them, but also still have that connection with my own childhood.
Cool, awesome. And you mentioned that in a former life you were chair of a charity. What can you tell us about that charity and what the work that you used to do?
So the charity is an incredible one. It's a charity in Brixton called Raw Material, and it uses music and performing arts to help disadvantaged children and also people at the Maudsley. And when I was there, they had a particular focus on mental health. And you can really see what happens when people don't have strong mental health foundations. Lots of things can become out of control, and giving people, empowering them to take back that control through music and media, through sport, giving people the pride and the sense of empowerment is just life-changing. And they did an awful lot of work with, I said, people coming through the Maudsley, as well as girls involved in knife crimes, county lines, and huge amount of issues. And I'm very proud to have been part of it.
Cool. And I wonder, you mentioned about this idea of building strong mental health foundations for people. What role do you think books and literature can play in that?
I think books are pivotal. When someone's a child, they need clear messages that are easily digestible, and they can't read themselves. So books, picture books in particular, are a great way to get messages through to children, because not all parents are storytellers. Parents have all different skills, but actually reading a book to someone, you can get a message that's been well thought out, that's been curated, that perhaps has underlying messages within that. And I think books are just fabulous. And it's also that bonding time, because you get to sit with your child and you get to share that moment. And the great thing about a book is it doesn't end when you close the book. You can have a conversation about it. There are sometimes my eldest, very sadly, was in quite a horrible accident last year in September, actually on my birthday. And he managed to fall through a broken net on a bouncy castle, and he fell 8 foot under concrete, fractured his skull, got a brain hemorrhage. And the past 3 or 4 months, he's pretty much been excluded from anything fun. You won't be surprised to hear he's been quite an angry little boy, because he seems life's been largely unfair to him. And it's been great to be able to have a book that we've been able to talk about Freddie, not talk about my son, but talk about Freddie and how he gets angry and how he changes colour. And maybe my son could tell me what colour he is today, so I get a better feeling for how he's feeling. And we can talk about the techniques that Freddie uses to calm down, and we practice those at home. And I'm not saying that the anger's all gone, but certainly having a way to talk about it, having a way for him to know what to do when he starts to feel angry is really empowering for him, because suddenly, rather than him being the one who's being affected by the anger, he can actually then start to address it and start to do something about it. And I think that's really valuable.
Yeah. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain. I'm here in conversation with Sara Yates. And this is Georgia Michelle with Tiptoe.
Sneeze out the back door. Tiptoe, tiptoe. 5:30 in the morning. Walks down the station. Tiptoe, tiptoe. 6:30 in the morning. Takes her first train home. Oh, it's certainly not the first time she cries herself to rest. hoping to find love, but only finding strangers' beds. She wonders how she got here, and wonders why she tried. Oh, it's another lonely walk home, forgetting strangers' eyes. Tiptoe, tiptoe, and she walks her fragile heart back home. Unlocks the front door. Tiptoe, tiptoe. Sky rises in the morning, and she's home. Slides through the silence. Tiptoe, tiptoe. The pain behind the walk of shame, reminding she's alone. Oh, it's certainly not the first time she cries herself to rest, hoping to find love, but only finding strangers' beds. She wonders how she got here, and wonders why she tries. Oh, it's another lonely walk home, forgetting strangers' eyes. Tiptoe, tiptoe, and she walks her fragile heart back home. Scared of the dark, but running from the light. Oh, broken hearts through empty glasses, men's perverted minds. Little does she know it's bound to hurt her life. Oh, no one wants to wed the girl that's been in bed 1,000 times. Tiptoe, tiptoe, and she walks her fragile heart back home.
That was Tiptoe by Georgia Michelle. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to rejoin Sara Yates for this week's guest spot.
Well, and as you say, I think it gives you a language with which you can talk about it. And also, I think, especially maybe as kids, but even for us as adults, you know, it's sometimes hard to be sort of self-reflective and to look at ourselves. And it is easier to look at somebody else and to, you know, somebody else that might be going through the same issues that we're going through, but it's easier to kind of say, oh, well, they should do this, you know. It's like that classic thing of like, if somebody's got a headache, it's very easy. You think, okay, well, make sure you have a glass of water and maybe go for a little lie down. And if you've got one yourself, you never think to do it. You know, you're too busy going, oh, I've got a headache. And so I think stories can probably help with that as well.
I think they can, but I also think there's another arm to this, and something else that I'm really keen to involve in the book, and that's giving the parents the ideas of what to do. You know, I'm a parent to 2 young boys. I know how exhausting it is, how time poor I am, how frustrating at times it can be. And sadly, both my parents have passed away. I don't have someone to ring up and say, what do I do now? And to be honest, even if they were around, you can't always have someone at the end of the phone, whereas a book can give me that strategy. I can see what's happened in the book. We can talk about it. And next time I can echo the language in the book. I can use the technique that's in there. And in this book, I've taken it a bit further. I've actually provided links to the NHS, to NSPCC, and some of my own breathing techniques, just so parents have got more support. Because, you know, parents are on their own emotional journey. They've got their own issues to manage, as well as trying to support a child who's developing, and that development itself is bumpy. So I think it's really important that we support both, and I think a book can do that.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned those sort of external tools and resources, and I noticed that you list those on your website. And I wanted to ask how your work helps support parents as well. And I think you've kind of covered that. I know you've got a readers list as well. So what resources do you share through your readers list, and why should people join it?
So through that, I've been sharing updates on the book when things are coming out. So a little bit of an advanced preview, sending through more things such as a breathing exercise that they can do, giving updates on what's coming out. There are some amazing resources out there. And I'm not coming up with new stuff here. There's a lot of great stuff out there, but sometimes just knowing where to find it is the hard part, particularly for a time-poor parent. So just being able to signpost, this is amazing, try this with your children, I think is something that is valuable. And I'd love people to sign up and use me as a gateway to information that will hopefully help them and help their children.
Yeah. Cool. And, talking about parents being time poor, I wondered how do you cope with that yourself? How do you balance parenting with, your creative pursuits and work and all of the various other things that you've got going on?
It's tough. It is tough. I think number one is remembering to be kind to yourself. I think when I first had my children, I was absolutely insane when I first had my children. I was making a TV documentary at the same time. And I remember one day I had a film crew turning up because I was doing a TV documentary about flipping property, and a film crew was turning up and I hadn't finished painting, and I was breastfeeding while painting, which meant I could only paint halfway up the wall because obviously I couldn't climb a ladder at the same time. And I tried to be superhuman. I was really just kidding myself. I think now I've realized that I just need to relax a bit more and to recognize that I can't do everything. The children can't go to every club, and that's okay. Yeah. What's really more important is that, I love my children. We have a great relationship. We have time and we do things together, but I also have time for me. And I think that latter part is the hard bit, because there's always work. There's always children. There's always the dog. There's always something going on, but I do try and fit some time for me into that to bring the balance back.
Yeah.
So it feels like a chore.
Yeah. And also I think as well, kind of coming back to, even when you're putting your children first and your family first, you need to take care of yourself so that you're in a healthy position to take care of them. It's not going to do you any good if you try and do everything for your kids and then burn out, and then suddenly you won't be able to, to do the basics even. So I think that's a really valuable reminder there to take some time for yourself as well.
Yeah, I agree with you, but it is hard, particularly for parents when their children are very young and you're often stuck at home on your own, and the world seems very small. Even getting out of the house can be an absolute chore.
Yeah.
Because you're leaving, you've got some explosive nappy or something else to deal with, and it takes you an hour, and then the baby's hungry and you have to come back, and it can be very difficult to see anything other than this treadmill. But I think having support from friends and family, or having support from other online communities, it is really important. And I think that's one thing that we're really lucky about today, that we have that exists in all different mediums. So it doesn't just have to be someone in your street. You can be physically isolated but actually very well connected.
Yeah. And especially again when it comes to the sharing of information and resources and things like that as well. If somebody's on the other side of the world, they can't exactly stop around and babysit for you, but they can share again, some of these great resources, and even things like breathing exercises, guided meditation, all of that stuff. And so, I wondered as well, just like a more general question about mental health, but what do you think we need to do as a society to make sure that everyone has the sort of the tools and support they need, both for specifically for anger, but for kind of mental health in general?
I think we need to do a lot more. I mean, when you look at the very extreme end, sort of the tragedy around suicide, when we're losing 10 in every 100,000 people, and a lot more of men than women, you can see we've got a long way to go. And, that's obviously a spectrum, and mental health affects people in all different measures, but there's an awful long way to go to get people to a position where they've got much better and more resilient mental health. I think schools have a big part to play, and I'm really delighted to see what's happening within schools. So they're starting to talk about emotions. But I think really what I'd love to see is just more on mental health, more diversity in it, more about, more books, more literature, more films. For me, I just don't think we can have enough.
Yeah.
Until those statistics come down to zero, there's still people that need help.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, just a couple more questions. One of them, I think I spotted this on your Instagram. So you met Ainsley Harriott recently. I wondered if you could tell us how that came about.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. When I'm not being a writer, an author, or a journalist, I've spent a lot of my career in finance as an economist. And apart from mental health, my other passion is really trying to get more women in particular into finance. I'm asked to speak at the Global Women's Conference on finance and how to raise finance, how to approach investors. And in that evening, there was the Global Women Awards, and it was amazing. So Ainsley Harriott was there. I had the delight of meeting Emma Thompson because her daughter was at the awards. Yes, it was star-studded. I was hoping that George Clooney would turn up because he's also won an award. Actually, her mum turned up, and it was lovely to hear her speak. But it would have been really quite fabulous to have met George Clooney. He was always a bit of a hunk for me as a child, so that would have been nice. Yeah, I was very fortunate and delighted to have been involved.
Awesome, cool. And the last question, which is technically 2 in 1, so it's what have you got planned next, and where can people follow you to find out more and to get a copy of the book?
2 great questions. So what I've got planned next is to do more in mental health, to take the book into schools, into charities, to really try and do what I can to move the needle, but also hopefully to collaborate and partner with others, because I think we're always much stronger together and have a much greater chance of making an impact. So talk to people who want to be involved and come on this journey with me, and I can help them on their journey. In terms of the book, it is widely available. You can come onto my website, which is sarayates.co.uk, and you'll be able to download the book, either an ebook, or you can order the hard copy, a nice big glossy version that you can read on your lap.
Big thank you to Sara Yates for joining me. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and this is Mika England with Feel Like a Girl.
Maybe there's no need to impress, wearing that skin-tight dress. Your body's amazing. I'm looking for a sexual hazing. All guns blazing, I can't wait. Baby, don't tell me your sorrows. Whipple's working tomorrow. Stand while the iron's hot. Baby, I'm hot. Lose control. Make me feel like a girl. I wanna bump and grind. It's gonna be cruel to be kind. Don't give me choices, baby. There's too many voices, I gotta lose control. Baby, it's getting late now. I think we're past our first date now. Baby, don't tell me your sorrows. We're working tomorrow. Baby, don't overthink it. Here's a Jaeger bomb. I suggest you drink it. Lose control. Make me feel like a girl. I wanna bump and grind. You're gonna be cruel to be kind. Don't give me choices, baby. There's too many voices. I gotta lose control. So who's this new boyfriend you're going out with? Oh, it's not a boyfriend, it's a girl. Doesn't that make some sort of weird lesbian one? I don't know, I don't get it. Lose control. Make me feel like a girl. I wanna, give me choices. There's too many voices. I wanna lose my mind. Gotta be cruel to be kind. I gotta lose control. Oh, I wanna feel like a girl.
Walked in so confidently, ready to win. Got my eyes locked on you the second you walked in. Had rumors about your life, breaking hearts both left and right. But boy, don't you know that karma ain't nice. I'm all in, ain't here to play games, but it will take two of us to make it. So tell me honestly, you won't lie in front of me when you say you love me. Stand by every word. Tell me honestly, think about your one and only. Know you're playing with fire. Don't make a fool of my heart. Don't make a fool of my heart. Don't make a fool of my heart. Don't make a fool. Don't make a fool. Don't make a fool of my heart. Ratting me out on a date to woo my heart. But little did you know I knew the game from the start. Boy, I ain't easy to win. I know this little game you play. Breaking love within the dark over and over again. I'm all in, ain't here to play games, but it will take two of us to make it. So tell me honestly, you won't lie in front of me when you say you love me. Stand by every word. Tell me honestly, think about your one and only. Know you're playing with fire. Don't make a fool of my heart. Don't make a fool of my heart. Don't make a fool of my heart. Don't make a fool. Don't make a fool. Don't make a fool. Tick tock, time is running out. Will you speak the truth or do I call you out? Tick tock, time is running. Time is running. Time is running. Tick tock, time is running out. Will you speak the truth or do I call you out? Tick tock, time is running. Time is running. Time is running. So tell me honestly, you won't lie in front of me when you say you love me. Stand by every word.
Fool of My Heart by Lizzie Porsey, and before that we had Feel Like a Girl by Mika England. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to head over to the Ilk Shed now to catch up with Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review.
Gillian Welsh, Time the Revelator. Dane gave me this CD and I listened to it as I cycled the hills around Wickham. The Chilterns are the Appalachians of Buckinghamshire. Often you will go to an open mic and meet up with a friend who plays lead guitar. And you might ask that friend to play some solos on your set. What you will be hoping for is that he will either join you in playing the chords while you are singing, or maybe play some tasteful runs in between the lines. Then after a couple of verses you give an obvious nod and he plays a solo while you take a break from singing. The problem comes when your friend plays lead lines all through the song, not with the vocal, but in spite of it. That is how this should sound, but it doesn't. Gillian Welsh sings in an Americana style, and her partner David Rawlings sings high country harmonies above her at strategic points. They first came to the public's attention after appearing on the soundtrack of the Coen brothers film Oh Brother Where Art Thou? The music has all the ingredients of rock music, only in an acoustic form, so Rawlings' lead lines have blues scales and bends. Together they create a very tight rhythm, so you don't really notice the total lack of percussion. The music we now call Americana is a melting pot of styles, and on this album we hear the influence of country, swing, bluegrass, folk, jazz and blues. Some of the songs have a mellow lullaby quality, with one of them being in waltz time, but the upbeat numbers have a rocky quality that reminded me of the acoustic tracks on Led Zeppelin 3. I watched an interview with David Rawlings on YouTube, and he described how some of the intervals he loves the sound of have been mistaken for playing out of tune, and how a lot of the reasons they work is the particular sound of his guitar, a 1935 Epiphone Olympic, a small archtop guitar with mahogany back and sides and F-holes that he found under a pile of sawdust in a friend's garage. It has a very clean sound, almost like a banjo. But with me it is always about the songs. The title track is very quick to get stuck in your head, especially with the number of rhymes to go with the word revelator. It reminded me of all Leonard Cohen's rhymes for Hallelujah. There are songs of love and heartbreak, and a song about Abraham Lincoln. There is also a song about Elvis that goes further than anything else I have come across in explaining the shock he caused when he first appeared on TV. He shook it like a chorus girl, he shook it like a Harlem queen, he shook it like a midnight rambler, he shook it like you've never seen. Time the Revelator, Gillian Welsh.
Big thank you to Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review. Thank you to Sara Yates for being this week's guest. Thank you to everyone whose music I've shared. As always, you can find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. We repeat on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. And you can email me here at the studio on dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. So I'm going to leave you with one last tune, and this is Humans Can't Reboot with Emotional Warning. I'll catch you next week.